We're going to look at the Voices Unheard, Indigenous Futures. We've got Professor Maree Meredith, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Indigenous Leadership at the University of Canberra, who's been a pivotal co-creator of this conference. Selina Walker, a student from the University of Canberra. Professor Barry Judd, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous at the University of Melbourne. And on Zoom, if all goes well, we will also be joined by Professor Mark Rose, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous at Deakin University. And we're also privileged to have Michelle Grattan lead the panel and lead the discussion. So I will stand aside and let you take over, Michelle.
Thanks very much for that. Now, do we have our link or not yet? No?
If we can switch to the Zoom link, then that would be great. In the meantime, maybe we'll progress with the people in the room.
Okay. Well, while we wait for that, Maree, I'm going to start with you. The Accord said that Indigenous knowledge should be right at the heart of Australian higher education. How do you think things are going with that goal?
Thanks, Michelle. Let me respond by saying that out of the 47 recommendations of the Accord, we know that 29 have been addressed thus far. What we did ask for in the Accord was an Indigenous-led review. We're still yet to see some movement on that, Michelle. So at this point in time, we feel like this is actually unfinished business. It's quite silent. And I suppose when we come to Canberra this time of the year, it's an opportunity for all of us to talk about what our priorities are. And I know that very much this time we're still waiting for the review. So having said that, we are also looking at how we can best prioritise our business in the sector. And one of the key things that we'll be looking at and speaking about over the next week will be the definition of self-determination. What does self-determination look like in our sector?
Now, I see that we have Mark now on Zoom. So I don't know whether you heard the question, Mark, did you, about putting Indigenous knowledge at the heart of higher education, and what sort of progress you're seeing decision makers make in this regard?
Just a minute there, Mark.
While we fix that up, hopefully, Harry, can you take up this point?
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the country we're on, Ngunnawal country, and recognise that it is unceded. Recognise any Ngunnawal people in the room. I know there's one. Other Indigenous people and other guests in the audience. Look, I think First Principles tells us that we live on a continent where Indigenous knowledges have existed for 65,000 years. And they're the oldest continuous knowledge systems that we know of anywhere in the world. So why wouldn't we make them central to our higher education system? I think picking up on Maree's response, all I can hear are crickets when it comes to making that happen. I think individual institutions are doing things alone, and one example would be at our university, we made a commitment several years ago to create an Institute of Indigenous Knowledges, and the work that institute is doing is certainly placing Indigenous knowledge at the heart of what we do at the University of Melbourne. But overall, I think the response from me would be one of dismay and disappointment.
Mark, I think we've got you now, do we?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And
We might
how's that
turn
working
you
all
down
right?
slightly.
Oh, fingers crossed. I want to
So you've heard
recognise
the
Gold-
discussion. How is it going with Indigenous knowledge?
Look, I remember, you can tell by the grey hair, look, I just want to recognise the land I'm on, the Yugambeh people of the Gold Coast, and I want to recognise the Ngunnawal people where you guys are at the moment. And in doing that, I want to recognise an elder that's passed, Auntie Agnes. And I remember one day she did a welcome to country and she asked the people to go outside and take their shoes off and feel Mother Earth. And it was great to see well-paid bureaucrats step out of Jimmy Choo's shoes, $1,000 shoes, and stand on the cold Canberra lawn in the morning. And it was a sight to behold. But in saying that, that's what we are asking people to do, is to come with us and share the Indigenous heritage of the land that we all live on through education. Look at your watch and give every minute 1,000 years. We've been here the full hour. Aristotle was here 1 minute 3 seconds ago. So it's the greatest asset we got. I agree with the other Maree and Barry, and in saying that, look, there has been movement, but we're kind of largely disappointed in how far we've gone. If it's an Australian university, we do have to be a central plank in it.
So, Selina, do you find among your fellow students that there is an appreciation of the importance of Indigenous knowledge, or are people not tuned in or not interested? Or
Yep, thank you. I just want to start by acknowledging my elders, the Ngunnawal elders, pay respect to my elders past, present, future. I want to acknowledge my elders here as well in the room. Welcome everyone to Ngunnawal country as a traditional owner and the very proud granddaughter of Auntie Agnes Shea.
Oh, wow, great.
Yes, it absolutely does. I have been at the university now for 5 years. I tried to study for 3 years. I couldn't get the help that I needed. And then when my grandmother passed in 2023, I was like, life's too short, I'm just going to start. And I have been struggling for I'm in my second year, I've been struggling for 2 years. That's because this is not our university of knowledge. Our university of knowledge is out on the grass with our elders, our community and our mob. And we have very different ways of learning. What we need help with as Aboriginal people is actually to navigate the white man's world and to navigate this university space. I've also heard from others that, it took them a good couple of years to be able to wrap their head around uni and how it works. Who here has a spare 2-3 years to be able to kind of waste worrying and stressing and, rather than actually living? They're only surviving. Nobody does. And so we need to funnel more support into that area. The other thing is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people we're very visual. So if yous are not acknowledging country, if yous are not acknowledging elders, if yous are not, showing the Aboriginal flag, if yous don't make it culturally safe and welcoming for us, then we are going to hide in the corner and learn it ourselves. That's not the way to learn. Nobody, if they're not safe, no safe child, no safe adult can actually learn. This is a place for learning, and you've got to get those fundamental things correct first. I haven't actually read the Accor recommendations, but I can already see as a student and as a Ngunnawal person that there are many, many gaps in it, and more work needs to be done because, it is our inherent right to be able to learn and to get educated, just like it is anyone else's right. And, my grandmother used to say all the time, well, why do they want to talk to me? Like, I've got a mission education, and anyone who met her, she was the wisest woman you will ever come across, and because she's been to the University of Life. That stuff cannot be taught. We have got to stop white fellas teaching black education. Now, you know, we are very, very multicultural, particularly here in the ACT, and, you know, even my fellow peers, my fellow students that I sit with, like, some of them are just absolutely gobsmacked and shocked at the truth that they're being told when they're doing the education, the Indigenous unit. The other thing is, I tried to do this one unit. I'll tell you a story. I tried to do this one unit, right? Failed it twice. And then the third time, I got tutoring and actually got through it. This particular unit, it had everything else that you could think of. The Indigenous module, the Indigenous part, was actually at the end. It was the last thing that we actually learnt about. That's a failure in itself. It needs to be first. And, you know, this year, in a different unit, I've got another teacher, and she done an entire lecture on Indigenous cultures. She's been up at Armandale, been on Armland, and, you know, the way that she explains it is that we have such sophisticated knowledge and systems in our culture that, you know, white man is only just catching up. And, you know, she really honed in on this. And, like, as a black person, I absolutely appreciated it. And, you know, on the discussion pages, I actually said, thank you so much for actually putting this unit first, because it's usually the last one that's taught. And at the end of the semester, like, how switched on are people really? And, you know, it wasn't just, you know, this is the text about, you know, about black fellas, but she actually went in, she spoke about her own stories, her own experiences, like, she went right into depth to undo a lot of that untruth. And, you know, as educators, and all learners are educators as well, that's what we need to be doing, because that's what we value as Aboriginal people. It doesn't matter whether we're a student, whether we're a teacher, whether we're the Chancellor, it doesn't matter. That's what we connect with.
Well, you've thrown out quite a lot of challenges there. So, Barry, can I ask you, you're disappointed at the progress made so far, and Selina's talked about the difficulty, I guess, of integrating Indigenous knowledge and other aspects of higher education. How do you address this question of integrating those particular streams in practical terms?
I don't think I can answer that in full, but we do need to firstly recognise that it's a complex problem to solve. Indigenous knowledge systems are very different from the knowledge systems that exist in the Western Academy, and how those things are communicated and conveyed across generations are very different as well. Remembering that Indigenous people possessed oral traditions and knowledge was conveyed through story, dance, ceremony, art. We're not people who learnt traditionally through book learning. So when you start talking Indigenous knowledge within universities, academics naturally go to, it's in a book. But often that's not what we're talking about, and I think there's a significant structural issue as well, because Indigenous knowledge systems are holistic, and art is science, is engineering, so on. And we are confronted in institutions by disciplines and silos where groups of academics don't really talk to each other, and that makes translating Indigenous knowledge into the academy a very complex and difficult issue. I would say one solution to that is to increase your understanding and capabilities around Indigenous knowledge by making sure that you have today and in the future more Indigenous people working on this question of translation.
Mark, what are your thoughts about this? How can this be done better?
Michelle, I think it can be done better when we understand the benefits of Indigenous knowledge as a broader academy. As Barry said, people think you go and do a course or you pick up a book, but what Indigenous knowledge, and my experience was I worked on the Australian curriculum for a decade with some great Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander educators, and what we wanted to do is sort of not to say one knowledge system is better than the other, although we had our opinion, of course, but in Indigenous knowledge, you've got the best gift for the future generations. So the future generations will need to deal with competing worldviews. This Australia, this country has got four faces. A colonial past, which is relevant and should be in the curriculum. Geographically a part of Asia and the Pacific, that should be in the curriculum. We hold the world's most diverse multicultural community, that should be in the curriculum. And the world's oldest intellectual tradition, Indigenous knowledge, and that should be in the curriculum. And the underlying aspect of it, it helps our next generation deal with competing worldviews and anchor themselves. It's nation setting. What we've got to break is the paradigm that those work experience kids on Sky TV often talk about, that's placating our a minority and its political correctness. It's not. It's nation building, and it is strong and valid, and it's the best asset we've got as educators.
Do you think that perhaps one issue here in higher education is that this knowledge hasn't been implanted or discussed, taught properly at the school level?
Of course, that, you know, we're 20 years on since the Adelaide Declaration, the Melbourne Declaration, the Hobart Declaration, not to mention the Nabat Declaration also. And so we're, you know, the time that the kid 20 years ago was sitting on the reading mat, that person now is in the profession. So we should be a lot further down the line, but we're not. I wrote about 20 years ago, the silent apartheid, that by excluding our business in the education system up until the 70s and the 80s, it cut non-Indigenous people out off from the cultural heritage of the land they live on. And so we have to overcome that and the paradigms that replaces that lack of knowledge. So the task is there.
Maree, can I turn to the question of social licence, which we've heard a lot about and talked a lot about earlier in the day. What about social licence in Indigenous communities, and especially towards higher education, towards the universities?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think we saw the university social licence seriously impacted, certainly around the outcome of the voice. I think it became really important that universities had a role to play, and coming into that difficult period of October, you know, I had to negotiate internally the support for the voice. So I was really fortunate at the time that the executive had, you know, put up, you know, the case that, yeah, we are going to support the voice. But having said that, coming out of the voice, you know, that was really important that the social licence became even more important. What we've also found is that since the referendum, there's silence. And then again, there's silence with the accord. So what we're asking for is for our priorities still to be at the table. Social licence is being questioned at the moment more broadly, but social licence for us is about us going out into community and making sure that community's priorities are actually embedded in the higher education sector. That's the kind of work that we need to do right now. It's important for us to be able to determine or to define what self-determination is. And we're still a long way off that, Michelle. So in terms of the social licence, There's a hell of a lot of work to be done, but we're using social licence as a platform to continue asserting our rights within the sector. At the same time, there's still work to be done around how do we define self-determination here on a practical level. Now, we've had a decade of RAPs. Just recently I was able to get the Indigenous leadership strategy up, which clearly articulated what Bill said was the outside-in approach. We know we can't do our business without our mob and our community, and it goes back to Selina's point about being on the ground, on the grass, with our mob, understanding what their priorities, but also their aspirations, How do we know that we are doing, good work? We can't assume that we're doing good work. So the issue of impact becomes really important. We need to be stepping into the space where we're not actually in the university bubble. We need to be at the interface. And Martin Ackett has always talked about this cultural interface. We do it day in, day out. But when it comes to the social licence, we can't be doing it without our own people. So the social licence is clearly attached. For us as individuals that sit in the university, social licence is about community, but also the community will give us the go-ahead. We need to get the approval from community, so we've got to do it both ways.
Mark, what do you think about social licence, and has the failure of the referendum had an impact, do you think, in that regard?
Look, I would agree with the other panellists, Michelle, for sure. We're in a difficult time at the moment, and it's given rise to a whole lot of people to really critique the progress that we've come. So we're at a vulnerable stage. The social licence in my university, my Vice-Chancellor, Ian Martin, is advised by a group of high-impact blackfellows from my state, and I find that a good way of connecting the hierarchy of the university through to the operational plans of the university. Also, strategically, rather than expecting my unit to do everything black, we argue that there's a cultural Pareto in the business that we do, that 60% of the stuff we do can be done 60 to 80% by non-Indigenous people. So each faculty has a contact with my office, and we set mutual goals and work to achieve them. So we're flipping the old way of doing business on its head. So but as the panellists know, that I am deeply embedded in community. I'm voted by 33 communities in Victoria to be one of their voices through VAI, and I'm also an alternate new peak body of education. NETSI HEC, not HEC. There's two NETSI HECs that sound very much the same, just to confuse people. But I always go back to the community to make sure that social licence that I'm dealing with professionally has got a validity and a probity to it.
Barry, what's your thought on this?
I don't think about it too much, but I think, it's we could go down rabbit holes and talk about the importance of Indigenous knowledge in terms of culture and race and nice things like reconciliation work and so on. But it's, for me at least, it's really about the economy, stupid. And the work that we do with Indigenous communities is grounded in relationships that are strong, and we follow their lead to a large extent. And I think most Indigenous people are not interested in the grand promises of governments that never come true, but in rebuilding the wealth that was denied them as a result of colonisation. And that's the social licence that Australian universities should be playing into. That is our role, to provide Indigenous people, like all other Australians, with opportunities to have choices in life, including the choice not to work in factories or whatever it might be, but to work in jobs where it's a career, and over the journey of a lifetime they can build up intergenerational wealth. and stop intergenerational disadvantage. That should be the role of higher education.
Well, on this point, it's notable that after the failure of the referendum, the government did move to stress economic empowerment and talked about various initiatives in that area. Do you think that that was the right thing, the right direction in which to go, or not?
I think politically it's probably the most viable position to hold. We are under attack as First Peoples, I think it's fair to say, from various quarters politically, and to focus in on the economic deal, I think is a good strategy. It is our core business. It is part of the narrative, and to avoid being pulled into conversations that come to us from the United States around wokeness and doing all these things that many people see as irrelevant or disconnected from Australia, I think is a waste of time. So for me, I think focusing on the economics and perhaps using language like, this is Australia, we believe in a fair go for everybody, don't we? Instead of importing stupid ideas from the US.
Incidentally, if anyone has any questions for the panellists, could you just put up your hand and we'll come with the microphone. Meanwhile, Selina, do you think, just on this economic point, that the university, in your case Canberra University, is preparing you and other Indigenous students for a better economic life? In other words, is it relevant to, we've talked about the Indigenous strand of this, but the general education, do you feel that they're giving you the best opportunity to move ahead?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't think they do enough to prepare you for the real world. If you're a postgraduate, you're still in the education system, so you don't experience the racism, and the unbiased racism that's in the government departments or in the community. You don't get to see and hear the realities of, most people would assume that there's no racism here in Canberra because, we voted yes, which I'm a proud Canberran, I'm proud of my fellow Canberrans for the yes vote. It's a demonstration that the work that my grandmother done, and other elders towards reconciliation can influence that change. But, we don't use degrees or PhDs, we don't use those qualifications in our governance and hierarchy systems. Like, my elders are my prime ministers. That's who I go to.
But you have to use those things in life, generally, broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're trying to walk in two different worlds because we still have cultural obligations, we still have cultural protocols that we have to follow, and sometimes they just don't align. And I don't think enough is done to kind of acknowledge that. And regardless of whether I hold a degree or not, as a black person, they're still going to employ the white person over me, sadly. That's the reality of it. And I've been taking some notes on points that I want to make. When we talk about reconciliation, reconciliation is not just a word, it's an action, and it's a human rights movement. And, what's everyone doing towards that reconciliation? When I tell, and I include this in my Welcome to Country, when I tell people that I've only been counted as a human being, we as Aboriginal people have only been counted as human beings for 58 years, particularly in our universities where it's a younger cohort, they're like, what? It's quite an eye-opener. and I'm only 44. I think because of social media, a lot of people feel like we have progressed here in Australia, and we actually haven't. And I get asked this question a lot, we've come so far, especially as the co-chair of the Reconciliation Council. I believe that, we're at our strongest point. We have more allies than we ever had. However, we actually haven't progressed as a country. The difference that I have seen is that our younger kids, and young adults, we're actually preparing them to be able to respond better. So let me give you an example. My now 18-year-old, when he was in kindergarten, he got called a nigger, didn't know what to do, came home, got upset, went into a shell. 2 years ago, my nephew went to school, same school, and a relief teacher came in, and he's fair-skinned, white hair, and he's got a birthmark on his arm. And she said to him, "Oh, is that the part of you that's Aboriginal?" Because it was darker. And he said, "What? No, I'm Aboriginal everywhere. It's in my blood." And, that instant response was educational. It shut it down, and, then he went about his day. So we're giving our kids the right tools to be able to respond, to be able to stamp out that racism. But also, she was a foreigner, so she actually had no idea. Her first education had actually failed her. I just want to loop back to your other point around, what can we do to implement, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education or Indigenous education into the universities. In my view, it's actually quite simple. Nobody on any bit of land in Australia, which is Aboriginal land, no matter where you are, should be learning anything, no other units, until they have learnt the Indigenous aspect. So that's across all sectors. Doesn't matter where you sit, they should be learning about blackfellas first.
Mark, can I ask you, we sort of talk about the higher education sector as a whole, as it were, but of course it's not really a whole, it's a whole lot of constituent parts. Do you feel that some universities are doing a lot better than others in incorporating Indigenous learning, in serving Indigenous students, and are the better ones sharing the knowledge with the ones who've got a long way to go?
Michelle, that's a great question. And obviously that with 39, 40 universities across the continent, there's going to be peaks and troughs in delivery around this space. But one of the things in Victoria that I'm particularly proud of is that in Victoria, we got the second smallest Aboriginal population in the Commonwealth, and we have 25% of the nation's universities, and that causes us a whole lot of challenges. So we have a program called Turon Manong, where we cut across all 9 universities to come together and we collaborate rather than compete. It's paid for by the Victorian Vice Chancellors, and it's in partnership with VAI. And to me, and I think UA a number of years ago said it was an exemplar. So that collaboration, mob in these universities can work as a collective, and although we're in the silos in the particular universities we work for, there are ways around. 2 weeks ago, just before the breakfast for the Stolen Generation, under Turamana, I got my last kid into a New South Wales university. So we work collectively with kids who fall between the cracks where they get their ATAR score. Family haven't had experience in university. So there's a whole lot of collaborative work that we can do. And what we need to do is have that fed back to the universities as exemplars of ways to improve. But I'm going to declare very loud and clearly that the people that mentored me in the youngest days, and Barry and Maree and Selina, we're all at different age groups. Barry and I are probably a bit closer, but we've seen the rise of the Black Academy and what, you know, we will remember when there was no Black Academy, and we've seen the rise. And while there's been progress, you know, it is intermittent, Michelle, in all honesty, and it depends on, at times, accidental heroes up at senior management. But we need to work to a time where we don't rely on accidental heroes. That is embedded in the work that we do. We are Australian universities. We sit on the richest knowledge base of mankind, from the oldest gene pool possible. So let's take advantage of it and progress as a growth for the nation.
Right.
Hi, my name's Kiri Fitzpatrick and I'm from Simple Nimble Consulting. I used to work at a university. I used to sit around a leadership table, and every time there was a conversation about Indigenous people, it would default to the Indigenous person. Or it would say, we're not talking about this, we'll get that person in and we'll ask them directly. And so no agenda ever moved forward unless that person was pushing it forward themselves. And it frustrates me. It frustrates me to watch, and I observe it all the time. And you know, I used to work at we're talking 10, 15 years ago, and I know things haven't changed. This conversation, we're asking the same question. We're asking these Indigenous people, how can we change? You have a whole room here of white colleagues. And so I want to change that question. I want to ask you guys, if you lived in a world where you felt culturally safe, where when you were at work, you didn't feel like the work was all on you, where you felt like your colleagues helped and participated, and you talk about it needing to be prioritised, where in that world it was prioritised, where people did know the truth. Can you tell me what would that look like? What would people be doing? How would they be talking to you? Tell me about that future state. I feel like your white colleagues need a little bit more clarity around the things that they need to be doing, not you, and not you telling us what we should be doing, but how would you feel if we acted differently?
Maree, that's a challenging question, and I'm going to put it to you.
I think it's really important, and I think there's consensus on this, that representation has to be at every level of the university, and we're yet to see some movement there. At the same time, I think what we learnt from The Voice is that, you know, the 97%, they were our allies. And I think we've got something there that we need to pick up on, is that our allies who are non-Indigenous people are prepared to kind of move into the space and help carry the load. At the same time, I think there's still work to be done around what First Nations first principle is. That Indigenous-led means that you need to follow the direction of your Indigenous colleagues, but there was also room for those 97% to come in and give us a hand, so that we're not having to talk for our business all the time. And I was, you know, from the Voice and the lessons there, that is so important that we now start to shift. Allyship is really important, and I think moving forward, our business needs to be led by us, but it's up to our other non-Indigenous colleagues to step in and give us a hand, because we still are confronted by the cultural load, and I think that's what you're talking about at the moment. We're constantly having to do our own business, but also speak for other stuff across the university. But at the same time, I think there is room there for non-Indigenous people to come in and give us a hand. And I see that's already happening. There's co-teaching in curriculum that happens, Michelle, so that two-way learning is done. That's really important. But the bigger issue also here is that universities need to be culturally safe for this work to happen. And I think we've still got a bit of work to do there.
Well, I think that's about all we have time for. Tim's the timekeeper. Right, and so
Sorry, I'm going to interject. There's one thing that I want you to take away from me today. And if you're at the Vice-Chancellor's ceremony thing, you'll know what it is. So I call it the Macca's drive-through. Okay? So everyone's been to a McDonald's drive-through? Yep. Yep, if you're shaking your head, you're a liar, because no, everyone's been to a McDonald's drive-through. When you go to a McDonald's drive-through, you're presented with two lanes, two options, right? Neither one of them is right or wrong. They're different, but not less. In all the work that you do moving forward, I want you to think of one lane as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander way of doing things, and the other lane as the non-Indigenous way. There is a third lane that's under construction. It's still under construction. You still get the same outcome, yeah? Still get the same Big Mac, hash brown, coffee, whatever it may be, just two different lanes to get there. Neither one of them is right or wrong. They are different, but not less. Be critical of yourself when you're doing the work that you do. Are you trying to make that person in that other Macca's drive-through lane jump into your lane, or do you need to jump into theirs? We take different routes to the same destination. All of you that got here today, you took a different route to get here, a different way. Does that make the way that you went better than the person sitting next to you? No, it doesn't. Different ways to do things, different ways to get there, same outcome. This is what it's like for us. And I love your point. You must have been reading my mind, because I was thinking, why the blackfellas always got to come up with the solutions when we have a room full of academics. So yeah, thank you, sorry.
Thanks very much, and thanks to everyone on the panel, and we nearly made it on time.